look at what potential articles of impeachment might look like. First president to be impeached, the House adopted a whopping 11 articles of impeachment. This is back in 1868. 9 of those 11 articles were about Johnson's firing of his Secretary of War, the title at the time. The House said the dismissal violated federal tenure law, the Constitution, and also defied Congress. Next example, Richard Nixon. As we look at that presidency, he resigned before a formal impeachment vote could take place in 1974. The House Judiciary Committee approved 3 articles of impeachment, all related breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at Watergate. The charges include obstruction of the investigation, resisting subpoenas, and abuse of power by violating the, quote, constitutional right of citizens, misusing agencies like the FBI. Third example for you, and that's President Bill Clinton. The most recent articles to be drawn up were for the president to be impeached. In 1998, this was related to his relationship with Monica Lewinsky and Ken Starr's investigation. You probably remember that one. Clinton was accused of 2 counts of perjury, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. Now, in his closing statement Thursday, Congressman Adam Schiff, he alluded to all of this history.
What we've seen here is far more serious than a third-rate burglary of the Democratic headquarters. What we're talking about here is the withholding of recognition in that White House meeting, the withholding of military aid to an ally at war. That is beyond anything Nixon did. This president believes he is above the law, beyond accountability. And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law.
Joining us right now, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center and co-author of the new Republic magazine piece, High Crimes, the in-depth case for Trump's impeachment, that breaks down the possible articles that President Trump may face. Elizabeth, thanks for being with us. What might be the articles of impeachment that this president may face?
Well, I think they, in contrast to some of the earlier impeachment efforts that you just went through, what is at the heart of the impeachable offenses committed by Donald Trump is his foreign corruption. And that's something that the drafters of our Constitution were specifically concerned about when they wrote the impeachment clause into the Constitution. So in our piece for the New Republic, we specifically looked at, first, the most obvious, the president leveraging his office and the American national interest in order to pressure foreign governments for his own political gain. Obviously, the Ukraine matter that has been front and center. Then, of course, the second article that we suggest is his obstruction of justice, trying to keep his wrongdoing, keep his corruption from coming to light. As Adam Schiff kind of alluded to, George Mason, one of the drafters of the Constitution, said, should the person who is most capable of committing injustice himself be above justice? And of course, the answer that our Constitution gives is no. No one is above the law, including the president. And finally, we included in our piece, even though it might not actually be something that comes out of the Judiciary Committee, the president's violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, which prohibits the president and other federal officials from getting gifts, profits, benefits, advantages from foreign governments, something that we know that the president, through his expansive foreign business dealings, has been doing since day one. And the problem with that is that we as Americans don't know whether or not when he acts on the world stage, whether he's acting to line his own pockets or in the best interests of American security and our standing in the world.
So, Elizabeth, as you outlined 3 potential articles here, give us a sense of relativity here. Number of articles versus severity of articles when we think of high crimes and misdemeanors here?
So this is actually a very simple, in many ways, example of impeachable offenses, and it gets to the heart of why the impeachment clause is in the Constitution.
Now, you say simple because in other cases, we gave 3 that exist, they were not as simple?
I don't think they were as simple. It's very easy to understand bribery. It's very easy to understand that when you have appropriated military aid and the president withholds it by saying, I want you to investigate my personal political rival, that is an abuse of office. And when the president tries to prevent his wrongdoing from coming to light by refusing to allow people to testify, by trying to get, back in the Mueller investigation, the special counsel fired, that's very simple for people to understand. Arguably more so than trying to connect the dots on the burglary of the DNC to Richard Nixon and all of that. So I think this is something that also is just so much at the heart of why the impeachment remedy is in the Constitution. And I want to really focus on this idea that impeachment is somehow anti-democratic. Well, it's written into our constitutional democracy in the words of the Constitution itself. And in fact, one of the things that the founders were so concerned about was that once a president was in office, he might use foreign corruption in order to stay there. So, it's really kind of, as a constitutional lawyer myself, I find it really kind of amazing how, amazing and terrible, how what's happening right now with President Trump is really the founders' worst fears realized.
What they were potentially thinking of in its epitome, if you will, when they were drafting these, when they're drafting the Constitution. Elizabeth, stay with us. I want to bring back our panel. That's former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Glenn Kirshner, Justice Department reporter for the New York Times, Katie Bennett. We think of this next step, passing over from the House Intel Committee, what we think, right, a report going over to the Judiciary Committee. They're now going to look at it. They're going to put together articles of impeachment. Elizabeth so well and so clearly laid out what that idea might be. Do you agree with the summation that she made?
I do. I think there will be at least 3 articles of impeachment, Richard. One for bribery, the now infamous deal where the president was withholding aid and conditioning a White House visit for President Zelensky and trying to leverage those things in order to get President Zelensky to announce a fake investigation into the Bidens. That's an easy one. I agree with Elizabeth. That's easy for us to understand. The second article I would suggest should be obstructing Congress, specifically obstructing congressional oversight and the impeachment inquiry. President Trump famously stood up on the White House lawn and said, I will comply with no subpoenas. And he's made good on that threat because he's told administration officials who could provide incriminating information about him, do not comply with lawfully issued congressional subpoenas. I've charged people for obstructing justice and witness tampering with much less evidence for that. That should be the second article. And the third article, I would suggest we need to go back to the Mueller report and talk about obstructing the Mueller investigation. And then the big ticket question becomes, what witnesses do you need to prove up the 10 counts of obstruction that were documented by Robert Mueller expressly for future use? Robert Mueller said, I'm investigating, I'm cataloging, I'm documenting all of this for the future. And Richard, the future is now in the impeachment hearings.
Katie, what might the Department of Justice do to impede this process, if anything at all?
Well, I don't think the Justice Department is going to directly impede the process. It's a Senate process. They're not going to try to interfere. But Bill Barr has done one important thing. He's created a great narrative for Trump's defenders. He has said, listen, in his reading of the Constitution of presidential power, that President Trump has not violated the law, nor has he overstepped his executive power. Lots of people disagree with Bill Barr. We saw that yesterday when several conservative lawyers got together and wrote a statement saying this is absolutely wrong. But it is an argument laid out by the Attorney General that will be very useful in this hearing. So there's that. And then also the Justice Department can provide a counter narrative because they are investigating the roots of the Russia investigation that Glenn alluded to. And depending on what they find, they could debunk that narrative. So those are 2 ways in which the Justice Department will quietly have a hand in shaping the Republican defense of the president.
And you can catch that article, by the way, on those who are critical of this current Attorney General in the New York Times that Katie penned just overnight. Andy, what's happening? How is the Judiciary Committee and Intel Committee, what are they doing right now from your reporting that you know in terms of that process we just described, passing the report over to the Judiciary Committee?
So there are actually a lot of open questions still about how exactly this process is going to move forward when it goes from the Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary Committee. We do know that the Intelligence Committee is going to write some sort of report laying out their findings. Republicans on the committee will have an opportunity to write some sort of minority report, possibly contesting what the majority lays out in their version of events. And then things will go to the Judiciary Committee, and there will be a series of hearings or possibly just one hearing about impeachment, and then they'll vote on articles of impeachment and it will go to the House floor. But a lot of the specifics in terms of what the Judiciary Committee hearings look like, what the exact articles of impeachment are that they'll be considering or voting on, a lot of that is still being worked out. A lot of this is still very much in the works as lawmakers go home for Thanksgiving and things move into December. Okay,
Elizabeth, so we are sitting across from a big turkey. We're slicing it up and people say, hey, what do you think? How should I watch this next step? Give me sort of the simple thing I should tell my cousin, my auntie, my uncle, my mom.
You know, I think it's to point out to the thing that binds us all together as Americans, the Constitution itself. This is a very serious remedy for very serious crimes. And, you know, it's high crimes. It's not necessarily something that's in the criminal code. It's not necessarily something that's a violation of the statute. Something to be impeachable does not have to be illegal, and something illegal is not necessarily impeachable. So look to the Constitution, the idea that the president should not be abusing his office for political personal gain, should not be abusing his office for personal financial gain, but should always be acting in the interest of the American people. And what we've seen laid out from career diplomats, these are not political operatives. These are people who take their loyalty to the United States and their oath to uphold the Constitution seriously. They've laid out a really serious and frankly uncontested factual case for impeachment that is very, very difficult. If you take it seriously, if you put all the political noise aside, it's hard to see how that isn't exactly why the founders put the impeachment remedy into the Constitution.
Well, in the season where my belly is full, my mind is full, thanks to all four of you. Appreciate you stopping by on a Saturday. Elizabeth Wydra, Glenn Kirshner, Katie Benner, Andy Duran. Have a very good weekend.